through the presentation first, and then we'll hold questions to the end, but just kind of remember different things as we go through it to come back. So I'm sure there'll be some questions on different pieces of it. So I'll start presentation. Let's go 1 second here. All right. So as we did touch on a meeting or two ago, the 40R is a smart growth overlay district that towns can adopt locally through town meeting. And this map here represents some of the activity related to 40R throughout the state of Massachusetts that's been put together by MAPC. So these are the points of emphasis related to the 40R district for a town to give consideration to. Again, these are articulated through the statute itself, unless I need to go through and read each one of those for you. You can read them yourselves, but.
Rich, can I throw in a note right there, please?
Oh, sure.
Thanks. So with 40R, I mean, there's a flurry of different reasons that DHCD will give for why it works in certain areas. In our situation, the appeal of this program is to be able to leverage zoning for as detailed of a spot as a single lot, and then be able to have that zoning work differently than the district as a whole. So in this case, you know, up until this point, we've had a lot of discussions about what the zoning for B1 should look like to be able to encourage the growth that we're looking for. But we keep running into this roadblock about, well, what works for the smaller sites doesn't necessarily work for the largest site that we have, which is the 4.5 acre Stop and Shop lot. So that's why we wanted to introduce 40R as a potential alternative to be able to create an overlay for the largest lot, be able to set the parameters with DHCD, and then be able to have a more defined set of zoning bylaws associated to the rest of the district. So before we go too far down that, I wanted to kind of give some background as to where the appeal of this program was and how it related directly to the situation that we're in as a community.
Sure, as you mentioned, I think some of the different points that we touched on through this planning exercise so far, and one of the appeals to the 40R is the ability for the town to adopt design guidelines that would be incorporated with the 40R district. So as we've been going through our work with the B-1, thus far we've approached the design guidelines as guidelines, whereas if we were to give consideration to a 40R district, we would then incorporate them into the district itself, so they would have more weight and teeth as opposed to just guidelines for the 40R district. And the benefit as well to us with the guidelines, they can serve the 40R district as well as the B1 district as a whole. So we can use them in both applications. So not necessarily, although we might make some revisions or slight differences between the 40R district guidelines compared to the B1 as a whole. We'll have to see as we progress and whether or not we proceed with it. But that's a significant difference than where we've been so far. One of the other significant benefits to us is that, you know, we have a particular site that we know of that we've been trying to see if we can generate interest or development more so, you know, in addition to some of the other sites, and having the 40R district could be a tool where perhaps the property owner, as they learn more about the 40R district, may want to work with the town on the creation and the ultimate maybe adoption of the 40R district, which is which is pretty common in a lot of the other 40R districts that have been developed throughout the state. There's actually the ability, when you have somebody who might be interested, it becomes a little bit more identifiable and real what the proposal is, as opposed to, some of the challenges we've had so far is we're putting together zoning bylaw potential recommendations for adoption, but the more generally applied, it's not a specific project per se. But in this case, the 40R district could be an area where we have a particular site that we've identified and a property owner who might be interested in pursuing it. So I want to go to the next slide.
Rick, do you need the approval of the property owner before you make it a 40R, or is that the town's prerogative to get just a vote on it?
You don't need the property owner's approval to do it, but it certainly makes sense to have them involved. And so the next slide, I think, is pretty important as we look at the types of potential areas that the state looks towards for 40R areas for adoption. Clearly, in our case, we're talking about transit-oriented development, but I think you probably could even look to the idea that even some of the other criteria would still be applicable in the case of the site we're looking at. Highly suitable location, area of concentrated development. But in our particular case, we'd be given consideration because it's abiding the MBTA commuter rail location. The TOD in relation to commuter rail has to be within a half mile, I believe, from the transit. And this slide I just took from a previous presentation, but this gives you, unlike the zoning that we're talking about, this sets minimum parameters for development density, residential wise, based on dwelling types. So single family, 2-3 family, and multifamily. One of the interesting things that you can do, and towns have given consideration to, is you can establish a cap with a 40R district, but one of the things we have to be mindful of is that the cap still is able to meet the minimum density standard. So we're talking about basically a floor. So we'd have to, so there is the ability to do that with the 40R, and it's something, again, if we decide to proceed with it, we have to take, do a deeper dive to kind of figure that out. The next slide here is I'm going to just switch over to, I'm going to go to, hopefully everybody can see this, but this is directly from DHCD's 40R webpage, and this is a recent activity updated as of last May for 40R districts. And so you can see the different municipalities and whether, if they have more than one district, they're identified there, the type of location, district size, year adopted, the future zone units, which essentially is you take your existing zoning, and then if you apply the higher density that would come as part of the 40R district, there's a difference, a potential development, and that would then give you the number of potential units. Doesn't mean they're going to be built out necessarily, but at least it establishes a numeric number. And then based upon that number, we'll get to it just a couple of slides from now, there is an incentive payment to the town for creation of the district that we can talk about a little bit. And the last column here talks about, has permits and building permits issued for different 40R districts. This gives you.
So, Rich, this is kind of hard to see for anybody watching via the stream or whatnot. So, but I think it's good to identify that there are a number of these districts established throughout the state. And we'll go into more detail about the ones that are most closely relatable to Norfolk later on in the presentation.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. And I think, and then the second piece to this, Kevin, and for everyone else listening or going to be watching in the future, we'll take and we'll put this on under the B-1 website, so that way it'll be available for people to look at afterwards. And there's a couple of reports that have been done as we go through the presentation that I'll be referring back to, or as part of this presentation, that will, we will post those reports on the website as well. So, and this is one of them actually. So there was a report done in 2009 from that was done between CHAPA, Citizen Housing Planning Association, and MAPC. So the idea of this slide is just to give folks an idea of the districts. So this is from 2009. The 2018 report has updated numbers on this, which we'll have available for people to look through as well if they want to, but it gives you an idea of the districts and the area associated with them. So they do vary, and some of the ones that we're going to talk about a little bit later are very small, down to a half acre, which is, you know, again, another unique part about this program is that you can essentially create a very small district that floats over the existing zoning, which is a very helpful tool for the town and other towns. The next slide is in the updated report that people will be able to take a look through. The reason why I put this slide in here is to distinguish between 40R and 40B. So unlike 40B, there isn't a mandatory requirement for 3-bedroom units. Certainly a 40R district could include 3-bedroom units, but unlike 40B, you don't have to have 3-bedroom units. And it might not be the easiest to see on the screen, but the last column lists out the bedroom count between the 2 and 3 bedrooms. So it gives you an idea of the breakdown of the different 40R projects and the combination of whether 1, 2, or 3-bedroom units. But that is at least a measurable difference between 40R and 40B, that you don't have to do that. So one of the things that we wanted to highlight is some of the potential positive aspects. So as I mentioned before, if the town were to create a 40R district, depending upon the potential future number of units that could be built on the district, there's a scale of how much the incentive payment that would be provided by the state to the town. So it ranges from $10,000 all the way up to $600,000. In our particular instance, that we're looking at one site, we probably would be looking at something much lower on the incentive payment scale, just for information purposes. But there is a range. Now, not to jump too a little far ahead, but if the town, let's say this went well and there's success in it, and the town wanted to consider adding another 40R district down the road, you could then get additional incentive payments for the creation of it. The other incentive payment is actually when you get a building permit, there's a $3,000 per unit incentive that's provided to the town to be used. Now, the way the program has changed a little bit, the funding source has changed. So what the money essentially early on the program was, I'll call, relatively unrestricted for what the town wanted to use it. but the money comes out of a capital account now, so the incentives really needs to be targeted towards a capital expenditure. I mean, the town can decide what capital expenditure is appropriate, but there is a capital expenditure, it has to be towards capital expenditure. The next financial incentive is a supplemental school educational assistance. The town, if you were to create a 40R district and it was built, the town can apply for education assistance, and essentially the town would take the tax revenue generated by the 40R district, tax revenue collected, real excise tax revenue collected, a school aid that you get if there are students within the school system, and then figure out the delta between educational costs and the money in. And if there's a negative, as far as school educational costs, the town can seek for additional school aid assistance. So if you look here, so far the program has given out $2.2 million. 3 of the 5 towns that applied, and 3 of them there, Chelsea, Lakeville, Lunenburg, have received actual 40S payments. I will say that those were both larger rental unit projects, developments in Chelsea and Lakeville, which generated the school-aged children. We do have an affordable housing production plan that was enacted, so it would coincide with that and meet the goals and objectives of that plan, which is very helpful to the town. It would help get closer to 10% affordable housing, which I think, again, is another positive aspect of the 40R program versus not having a 40R program. As I mentioned earlier, the development design guidelines can be incorporated into a regulatory fashion, which is a little bit above where we've been talking thus far. Design guidelines, we've been talking utilizing them as guidelines. They become more powerful from a design guideline standpoint in a 40R district. The 40R district, we can increase the amount of affordability when it comes to rental to be able to then have all the units qualify under a subsidized housing inventory, which is, again, can be a good benefit to the town. And the minimum amount of affordability is 20%. So again, consideration to just increase it by another 5%, if we were to have a 40R development, it would provide a benefit, significant benefit to the town to be able to count more units towards our subsidized housing inventory. The one that I think is very important is local control. You know, the bylaw would be adopted at town meeting. It does have to go through the Department of Housing Community Development to get approved and make sure it meets the program guidelines. But once it went through the whole approval process, it would be done. It would be under the auspices of the planning board. The planning board does have, and does right now, have the ability to have site plan approval associated with it. You don't necessarily have to have it, but that is one of the regulatory permitting processes that we have currently that would be applied to a 40R district if it were to be developed in the town. And the last positive aspect, which I think is important for consideration, is that it could be potentially used to deny a 40B project. I'm gonna just go to the next slide. This slide and next slide, these are letters. This one is from Mass Housing. So just as the process works, if somebody is interested in filing a 40B in your community, they apply to Mass Housing for a project eligibility letter. Mass Housing then contacts the town and makes them aware of potential project that's being considered in your town. And then the town has the ability, if in fact we did have a 40R district, to make the case to mass housing if there was a project that inappropriate and out of character or in a bad location, rationalize why it shouldn't be given a project eligibility letter. This one here in particular is from the town of Easton. The next one, there was there we go. Again, this was from Department of Housing Community Development website. This happened to be in Reading, again, where they denied a 40B. So I think that's, there certainly is value to that, to the town, having that in place.
Rich, can I just throw a little commentary onto the positive aspect side?
Sure. Yep.
Thanks. So what we're looking at here with the 40R program is a distinct list of benefits that check many of the boxes that were raised as concerns with just changing the zoning to be able to accommodate for more and the type of development that we're looking for. Whether it be through incentive payments, the offset for school-aged children impact, the flurry of other benefits that it would afford us. I think the biggest one is the ability or more leverage to be able to fight 40B, both from two aspects. The first, the ability to be able to generate subsidized housing inventory to work towards that 10%. With the new 2020 census that came out, we are now further behind in getting to 10% than we were just last year. Well, when they certify the census, that is. Rich, do you have an estimate of how many affordable units we need to generate to hit 10%?
I think we're probably in the 150 range, 175 with the new census count.
Yeah, between 150 and 175. Yep. So being able to utilize a program that will allow us to count all developed units towards that inventory would be incredibly helpful to helping us achieve that number. The second way is, as Rich had identified, there have been two instances where communities had made progress towards hitting their affordability goal, as well as had a 40R district identified within their municipality, and use that as leverage to say that this incoming 40B project does not fit in with what we're trying to do. And that was upheld by mass housing, which is kind of a rarity considering that the success rate of them backing up a denial is what, Rich, somewhere in the 5% range?
I don't even know if it's that high.
So there's a couple of distinct benefits to leveraging this program that check some of the big concern boxes for those who may have been opposed or had concerns with some of the original proposals in just changing the zoning. Just wanted to make sure that I summarize that up. Thank you.
Sure. I think the other point to raise and make people aware of as well is if you look at the 40Bs in the bigger picture, the ones that have been before the town. So if you look at Abbeville, 144 Seacon Street, 194 Main Street, those projects, as they came in, they had, there was the goal to try to create some rental in there to kind of bump up the numbers. So it was combinations of rental and ownership, and then like 194 Main Street was all rental, and then it was going to be all market rate. Then it went to townhouse. So in the big picture, they've kind of shuffled around the composition of those developments, and then as the dust settled, Abbeville is certainly a much scaled down project than originally came in. Certainly 144 it's much different than it came in originally. It was up around 100 units. And then last 194 Main Street is 36 townhouse units. Now the benefit of all those different projects to the larger picture is that it will put us in the position to have safe harbor. So with safe harbor being on the doorstep of having that, it does give the town the opportunity to ward off bad projects. And if the town considers the 40R district, it would give us a little bit of breathing room to try to see if we can work towards a good project that would help us from a 40B standpoint as well, where we would like to see it, to then put ourselves at that point where we are would be the 10%. And then going forward, we would be long-term over the next decade, the 20 to 2030 decade, in a much better spot to manage and hopefully eliminate some of the potential projects that may be out there that haven't even come in the inappropriate areas of town, which are much more low density, rural, farmland, etc. So, so in some respects, the timing is somewhat maybe fortuitous to us to even give consideration to this right now. So another excerpt from the report that was done in 2018, the approval process, at least from a developer standpoint, could be much quicker. Hopefully, a good project, you can get it done in 120 days. Going through the planning board that has, a lot of expertise in site plan approval, that certainly helps matters. So that's a potential positive that developers, I think, to a degree, would like to have, and I think it helps the community as a whole. The other piece, which is the idea of appeals, if somebody were to appeal a 40R, they have to put up bond, and so the idea of appealing a 40R project, you really have to have good merit to try to appeal a 40R. It's not something that can be done without financial implications, which again, from a project standpoint, it could be a positive even from the town standpoint if it's a good project. So that's another piece of 40R that doesn't exist with 40B.
Rich, can I jump in quickly to offer something to that point?
Sure. Yep.
So one of the reasons why there are some more stringent requirements surrounding the appeal process of these projects is because most of the work about setting the parameters for how these developments will look is done when you get the overlay district approved. I mean, we're going to be able to go through and identify many of the aspects that we've already talked about as part of the zoning changes for the town center, as it relates to building height, building footprint, parking, all of these parameters, we're going to be able to define ahead of time when we set the overlay district. So by setting those parameters, in turn, we reduce the risk of having a project come in that doesn't fit our expectations of what we're looking for, thereby reducing the risk or the need for a more open and thorough appeal process. So I just wanted to make sure I clarified that, because I know that could raise a red flag for some people who say, well, why is it more difficult to appeal? It's because we're able to set the parameters for how this is going to work from the get-go. Thanks, Rich.
Sure. And then on the other side of things, relative to some of the negative aspects, I think some towns would consider the fact that, there's another layer of bureaucracy that, it does have to go through the Department of Housing and Community Development as well as the Attorney General for the approval process. Oftentimes that may be seen as a potential negative. The time frame, I've had various time frames associated with the approval process, between 6 to 12 months. And certainly there's some that have been even longer than that. And if you think about it in terms of, developing a 40R district, having a public hearing, getting it to DHCD, and then lining up with a town meeting, it's somewhat easy to see how, the time frame could be pushed out, which is not necessarily a bad thing sometimes, but some might consider that as a negative. negative aspect of is what we call, it's a clawback provision. So if the town were to enact the 40R district, the incentive payment, if there's no activity in the district, the state may consider seeking reimbursement for that incentive payment. I will say that that hasn't happened as of yet, since the program's been enacted. There are a few towns that still haven't had any activity, but in light of, we went through one housing crash once through the duration of this program. Now we're sitting in the middle of a pandemic. So there are things that, as we know, can occur outside everyone's control that could affect whether or not the 40R actually gets done or not. So they do have that there, but they haven't pulled that trigger on anybody as of yet. But just to make everybody aware of it. Same thing to be said for the incentive payments. They're subject to, like most things that come from the state, to appropriation. But that can be, I think if towns are just looking at this, we're looking at just specifically from the financial incentive aspect of it, that may look differently than it's one of the many pieces of the advantages to give it consideration. But I want people, just to let people know that it certainly could be a detrimental aspect of it. Again, it depends how you look at this next one. It could be a negative or a positive. Setting all those parameters that Kevin had mentioned out ahead of time. But also those parameters can unduly restrict the development. So you have this second set of eyes to look at what the town is considering for standards and whether it meets the spirit and intent of the program. Now, at the end of the day, if the town goes forward with the 40R process and we have a set of standards that we want to implement and it doesn't meet muster with the state, then we don't have to proceed with it. And there are towns that have applied and for this particular reason, and others decided not to go ahead, and some have flipped out to be a 40B. So it's certainly something that the town could say, look at, these are where we're drawing the line, and so that could be potential negative if with that oversight and trying to meet certain parameters. The second one, or the next one down, once the district is created, you need DHCD approval to repeal it or amend it. I think it's probably intuitive about amending it because you'd be adding a new one. I think the notion of repealing, it's probably a little bit, that's a little bit harder maybe for people in many instances. It's not, certainly with zoning, locally adopted and voted on by town meeting, we could, if we see something that needs to be changed, gets proposed, brought to town meeting, could be voted on and repealed or amended and so forth. But this adds another layer to that process, if that were to be the case. And then the last one, Kevin did touch on it about the posting of money relative to challenging a project would be seen, I think, by some people as a negative. We'll just kind of.
Hey, Rich, if I could just go in and summarize quickly for the negative slide.
Yep. Go ahead.
Thanks. So, usually it isn't the best approach to throw out all of the negative aspects of an option that you're trying to pitch a town committee on pursuing. But I think that it was important to, clearly and honestly highlight some of the downsides associated to the program, whether they be perceived or actual. If we're going to be able to get alignment on this being a potential path forward for this municipality, we want to make sure that we call out all of the downsides that have been noted by other communities that have followed through on this program. So these are not only the negative aspects that we were able to find in terms of the outlines on the state websites. These are also negative aspects that we found from residents writing in to the editor of local newspapers, people's comments in social forums, Essentially, anybody that had taken issue with some of the proposals that other towns had, we wanted to collect those and make sure we called those out from the get-go so that we could really weigh how the program as a whole will work for our community. Thank you.
Sure. We did, I think we probably covered this one pretty well through the presentation. I think the one that probably people most interested, the second bullet. So if you look at what 80% area median income means right now for the town of Norfolk, it's $96,250 for a 4-person household. And if you slide, 3, 2, 1, the income level goes down. And conversely, if you look at a larger family size, the income limit goes up as far as what 80% of a median area income means to the town of Norfolk. This bullet item talks about what the approval process to get a 40R district, the pieces to the puzzle to make it all happen. I think it's self-evident there looking at that. The next slide, I think, is probably even a little better slide than MAPC put together. This flow chart, I think, looking at this, I think, kind of brings to light the process and then the associated time with it. So it's really, if you look at it, so just quickly look at a number there, you're talking, so you can easily see how 6 months or more it takes to go through this process. Again, it's not, just to be aware of it. It's not, and I'm not suggesting that it's a negative thing, but it just, it's good to have a kind of a benchmark and just expectation of the process that would be involved with it. This is some of the pieces to what actual application would entail as well. That was from DHCD. So here I wanted to touch on, so we looked at, there are many other municipalities out there with 40R districts, but this is kind of 4 that we thought would be of interest potentially to look at. Not necessarily model, because each one of these towns don't fit 100% with the town of Norfolk. There's really no town exactly that matches each one, but you get a sense of, at least the scale and size. I mean, Norwood has 2, and they're both less than an acre, and the unit counts associated with it. Natick is a similar size site comparably to us. And Sharon obviously is a much larger site, as well as Easton, and gives you an idea of maybe some comparisons to look at. And again, that would be something to, if the town decided to move forward with a 40R district. These communities that have adopted the bylaw, they have their design guidelines associated with it, and each of them have different varying requirements and standards associated with their districts too as well. So it's just to give maybe an area where we could look to try to gain some insight. Let's see. So again, this is just a pictorial representation of Sharon. I think we touched on this a little bit, the one Easton the last time, again, directly from, I think, so this one actually is constructed. So this one, again, if it does, if there is interest in the town, it'd probably be nice to take a road trip, potentially, if we give consideration to it, to kind of walk around, get a feel for it, because it is, relatively close to us, to take a look. And then I don't have, and that's it for the slide. So as I mentioned in the beginning, that's the presentation. And then I wanted to open up to, if you had a slide you remembered or a particular point, let me know, and we can kind of field any questions as best I can between myself, Josh, Kevin, whoever to. I'll stop screen sharing for a moment, just so we can see people, I guess. Might help.
Rich, I have a couple of questions when you're ready.
Go ahead.
You were alluding to the 4.5 acre parcel as the target of this 40R.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask the Chris Henry question. You know, what happens if other properties are combined and we have a 2.5 acre property? You know, are we shortchanging ourselves by not looking at that other possibility, or is it this mainly just the only focus we want it to be?
I think how I would answer the question is how similar other communities have approached it. They've cut, I'll call it relatively started small. So granted, I know the Stop and Shop site, you know, is a 4 acre site, but they tested out the program on a particular site, and then, you know, went through the process and even had a project and then went back. So you always could go back if you think it's worthwhile to expand it. But I think it's kind of, sometimes you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. And I think having something, at least I think for the most part, there's a degree of some consensus that I think if any of the sites that we've been looking at in the district, that particular site potentially could handle the higher density. And there's some benefits to that particular property compared to some of the other ones. For example, you know, the proximity to the rail station, but also the way the site lays out compared to the surrounding neighborhood, you know, the ability to kind of work something in that blends in well, that would be higher density. I think that's kind of the idea of at least exploring it. It's not to say that we couldn't go beyond that, but I think we run the risk of potentially spreading ourselves a little bit too thin, so to speak, if we go too far out.
I raised the question. I'm just wondering if I'm thinking about the public. Would they, you know, I'm sure that question would come up. You know, why are you only doing one spot? What happens if then 40Bs, you know, circumvent us, you know, by going into other places? What have we achieved then?
Well, so I think
so if I,
okay,
Rich, could I take a shot at that really quick?
Yep.
Thanks. So Ed, I think that the idea behind this is that we would leverage the largest site that's there and utilize 40R to be able to give us a little bit more leverage to only accept 40B projects that fit into our vision for town center. So if we were to move forward with a 40R overlay on the Stop and Shop lot, while continuing to make progress on the other 40B projects currently before our ZBA, in theory, we would be able to have a little bit more leverage to be able to fight other 40Bs that would come in and potentially try to work into the other lots currently available in town center. Further, if we were to pursue this 40R overlay for that particular parcel, I believe that we would hold on proposing the rest of the B-1 zoning changes and have that come to the forefront of priority, and then have the rest of the B1 come as a phase 2 to follow in behind it. So we would be able to evaluate what the impact of our 40R designation would be, and then respond appropriately in the B1 zoning changes that we propose thereafter. At least that's, you know, the initial vision. The intent of this proposal and this presentation right now is just to introduce it to the group, and then we can shape and decide if we want to dig in deeper based on the feedback from the committee as a whole. So just wanted to throw that out there. I'm sure Rich will be able to throw something a little bit more eloquent on top.
No, Kevin, I think you did a nice job touching on it. I think I think one of the things we've probably clearly heard, I would think, I mean, is that, you know, anytime you talk about zoning, as you know, as we've been touching on it, that you're introducing change and how that change occurs and what the outcomes would be. And I think, you know, trying to focus something that I think people could have more consensus around, at least gives somebody a real tangible feel for what that may be, as opposed to, you know, trying to evaluate, as we'll be talking about too later when we discuss this meeting, some of the more of the unknowns. And it's a good from development standpoint and planning standpoint. It's, if you think about it, that's where you want to have your high density development, right near transit. So I think that's and the fact that where it sits in relation to the rail, so you could literally, you know, walk underneath Main Street to get to the rail station. So there's a high degree of walkability too. Again, increases the, you know, the desirability. So I think that's kind of the thought behind it, at least approaching that one.
One of the negatives, sorry, another question that you raised about the lead time, the 6 to 12 month time. If a 40B project comes in the interim, does your application freeze the 40B project out?
No, it doesn't. However, as I mentioned, that where we are, so 194 Main Street was approved last week, so July 22nd. 144 Seekonk Street will be before the ZBA tomorrow evening. If that gets approved, let's just say for discussion purpose, it gets approved. Between 194 Main and 144, we've now, as a town, approved 16 units, which gives us 1 year safe harbor. Abbeville is just a little bit behind that. Presuming it appears like it's headed towards an approval. With that one, that gives us an additional, so 2 years. So we'll have this, not quite 2 years because it runs from the first approval, but we probably, it all said and done, we probably have 22 months of safe harbor from 40B projects. So it does give us a window of safe harbor to do the planning work to try to move forward with the 40R to stem off other 40B projects.
Thank you.
Another question?
So Rich, what in this, bringing this back to the committee, right? What will the 40R district do to promote commercial development in the B1 district?
Well, I think the approach that we're taking is that, I mean, I don't have all the, you know, we haven't ironed out details or consider whether to go forward, but we're talking about doing it in a mixed use fashion. So, well, part of our B1 work, we'll be talking about the financial viability of some of the zoning that we're working on. I think there's argument to be made that this 40R district would meet that goal by providing an incentive financially to further some of the mixed use that we're trying to accomplish with the 40B. And as an aside, as we probably know, we touched on it, the more, you know, wallets and heads and that happens closer in walkability to downtown, in the downtown will can add the bottom line for business development, you know, so you're adding more people in close proximity.
Right. So just, do we have any numbers we can put to that yet? I mean, if the one property that's been proposed, what kind of heads are we talking about putting on it?
We're talking about
the minimum of 90.
What's that?
I was just telling him that with the minimum set by the 40R program for a 4.5 acre lot, the minimum is 90 units.
So at 1.5 occupancy, we're talking about
35.
135 people.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we're not sure if the development on this site is going to be mixed use or not, right? So we don't know that we're inviting.
That's an open option.
Yeah. We don't know that we're inviting commercial development. We might just be inviting residential development. And if we do invite that residential development, we might get 135 people. Right. So the question becomes, does 135 people invite business development, commercial development in the B1 district?
Yes. That's a,
So from my perspective, two ways to look at it. One, as with 40R, we have the ability to designate that we want mixed use development for the overlay. So if we decide that's what we want to do in addition to the residential, we have the ability to outline that ahead of time. If we decide that it's more important to just focus on the residential for that site and maybe keep building height lower or one of the other many parameters that we have power over there, we would be injecting that 135 additional walkable distance individuals that can only help the attractiveness for the market of other retail or commercial sites in the area. I can't put a number on that. I don't think I'm the right person to even try to put a scalable number as to how that would work, but maybe Josh or Rich would be able to identify how much more attractive that makes the area.
just before I answer that, I do know that Aaron, so some of the other 40R districts, they've mixed a combination of what that commercial is associated with the 40R district. So they have a portion of it, but I think that's where we would have to kind of do more homework to figure out what that number is. But also that would have to be, as you might not caught in the beginning, is to continue to work with the property owner to consider that site and what their ideas of that site and what that may be too. So we can at least kind of evaluate if things line up or don't line up. I have reached out to them. They are, I let them know that, obviously I've updated them on the B1, but that we are potentially looking at 40R and to, kind of educate themselves on it and perhaps.
So let me make this pitch to the
Yep.
committee, right? And it's picking up on something that I think Ed was getting at a little bit, right? I mean, one of the things mentioned is that if we were to proceed with what's being proposed at this 40R in this one site, we would drop the other recommendations we're making for the zoning changes in the district. So I'm a bit concerned that changing the zoning on one site doesn't promote commercial development in the B1 district. We could perhaps argue about the level of promotion of that one site, certainly. I'm of the opinion that if we were going to go 40R, we should consider more sites, and we should consider enough sites that dropping the rest of the recommendations for the rest of the district makes some sense, right? So, I mean, if we created what Rich has often talked about being a high density area and a low density area in the B1 district, that promotes more development in the B1 district area. You're talking about, again, you're talking about more people, you're talking about more mixed use. Keep in mind that I think one of the reasons we're trying to figure out creative solutions for what we affectionately call the Stop and Shop site is it's a tough site to put commercial development, right? It's off the beaten path a little bit, off the immediate commercial beaten path. Mm-hmm. So, perhaps the right use for that site is residential development. So if we maxed out the residential development on that site to put heads and beds, it would certainly support commercial development in other parts of the town. But, sitting here, listening to the presentation and having had the conversations, I think it would be unfortunate to promote 40R on only one site. I think that the committee should consider a larger area.
I think that certainly is it's certainly an option that the town can consider. It might, there's not necessarily, I think there's a comfort level on how to kind of figure out a path forward, and we have to probably try to figure that out with if we're going to go forward, what's the town appetite for that. Again, I'm just thinking in terms of planning, there's a planning and then there's trying to work that through a process to get approved, and sometimes biting off more might.
Yeah, but that's all part of what we're trying to do here as a committee, right, Rich? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot and make you answer questions here either. So, I'm just saying, I think the goal of what this committee is trying to do, which is promote commercial development in the B1 district, I think maybe we should think a little bigger.
Okay. Yep. So,
so we, as part of this conversation later this evening, Josh is, I believe, going to talk about the financial analysis we talked about at one point in time, right? Which my guess is will tie somewhat into, how many heads his group thinks we need to quote unquote promote commercial development downtown. So, maybe that question will get answered later. I don't want to steal Josh's thunder. So, but it'd be interesting to hear from Eileen or Gary on what their thoughts are at this point too. So,
yeah, I think I've been following your discussions here for a couple of weeks, and you've touched upon 40R and the financial incentives. I don't think are really that important. Maybe the 40S school provisions, but I think leverage against potential 40B development is solid, and I like the idea that we're poking towards here. Where at what level do we increase residential development in order to help promote commercial development? So I see. I'm not putting my hat in the ring for 40R right away, but I do see the potential benefits here.
Eileen?
I think it seems like a much more viable option. I think people would be more interested in something like 40R. There's such a vocal, negative sentiment about the 40B, so it's something we can control. I think that it gives people more hope to be able to develop their community as much as in the direction that they like. I think the financial incentives actually are important. I think people would like to see that. So I think it's a great alternative.
Yeah. Now I'll jump in there with a little bit more because it popped into my head, but we've had a couple questions about not giving away development or desires that the town may have through as of right zoning changes. So I think one thing the 40R does for us is, one, it takes the design guidelines that we've worked so hard on and almost makes them a requirement. And two, there's a whole layer of incentives provided to the town that are meant to counter that development, right? So in other words, there are gifts given to the town because of the willingness to accept that development. So, to some of the comments we've heard in the past about maybe not giving stuff away, I think 40R is a step in the right direction there.
So, Martha and Chris, your hand was up. Now it's down. You want it back up? So go to the public, or?
I just wanted to echo what Aaron said about considering the 40R and all the benefits it has in other parts of the town too, sort of making it not so narrow. And then, Rich, did I hear you correctly when you said when all the current 40Bs are built out, we'll be in safe harbor?
So there's two, just to clarify. So when they're approved, there is safe harbor, which is a temporary.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
But isn't that just because like another one can't start the process?
So it acts similar to as if you're above 10%. So in that safe harbor period, if somebody were to apply, the town could say no.
Right, maybe
And then
Martha
let me
I guess it's a way to stretch things out, Rich, right? It's so a town doesn't get hit with 10 40B developments in 1 year, right? Because it would be almost impossible to plan for that infrastructure. So what the state says is because a 40B project is happening in your town, you have a period of time where no other 40B projects can apply and be approved. It's like
Okay, all right, okay.
it's like a grace period.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't know that was called safe harbor, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And what I think what would be great for me is to understand the 8 per acre, 12 per acre. Is that the town applies to say, we want this size, or is that left up to the discretion of the developer?
So we would have to adopt, so first of all, we may not necessarily do actually single family at all. So you don't necessarily have to have single family, 2 or 3 family, multifamily. So you can there's the ability for the town to pick, okay, which path we wanted to pursue. And I suppose if we wanted to, we can include it. If we did include single family as allowable development in the 40R, then we have to meet those minimum density standards. Now, not just to nuance it a little bit, but you can play around with the overall density to create some maximum caps, provided everything as a whole meets the minimum affordability requirements. Just as those.
But the minimum unit count, I think, to answer the question for mixed use development is 20 units per acre.
20, right. And single family homes, 8 units per acre. And then 2 or 3 family units is 12 units per acre.
So I just want clarification though. The town, whatever that looks like, says this is our 40R and we want this kind of 2 family, whatever, 4 family, single family. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So then could you tell me what, if there is, do you all have any thoughts on what that would be? Just, I'm trying to get a sense of if I could then overlay that on 25 Rockwood, what would a 40R look like versus the 40B of 25 Rockwood? Just so I can wrap my head around.
Yeah. So
that. I don't need that today.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. So
but that's the catch with 40R, right? So with the 40R review process, Martha, we'd be trying to get our design guidelines approved, right? And so the design guidelines set heights and architectural elements that are involved with developments. So our goal through the 40R process would be to have our design guidelines adopted so that the largest, granted in height and look building, would be similar to what we have in our design guidelines. What would change based on the size of the lot would be the area that building took up, right? So in other words, if we got 40R approved and our design guidelines were approved, the buildings that are now being built at the Walpole train station could not come in as part of a 40R project, right? They wouldn't meet our design guidelines, right? But what might happen is what we were talking about with our design guidelines and the zoning changes we're proposing was instituting a maximum square footage for the footprint of any single building, right? So in order to get to 20 units per acre, the maximum square footage of that single building might end up being bigger than the numbers that we were kicking around in our other conversations.
I think to answer your question, Martha,
Yeah.
I think what I would do is I'll work on putting a spreadsheet together basically with the 40Bs, getting land area, units per acre, and that way kind of get to at least closer, I think, at what you're asking about, to get a kind of units per acre.
I like spreadsheets, but I'm a visual person. So you had those 4 towns, Norwood, Sharon, Natick, and some were built out and some were not, right? I think that's what the unit permits, whatever. So, which is great, but then you showed me Easton. So I want to see that Natick build out. I want to see show me what a 40R is. And to Eileen's point, we are the public. So if you can't convince, like if I can't wrap my head around it, dedicating this much time, it will be very hard to message this in a way that I think people won't be afraid of subsidized housing, low income housing. That is a part of 40R that those words are going to come out and people are going to be like, wait, what? So this, for me, I want to hear more, but I need it tighter and just succinct in a way that I can be like, oh, okay, I see that. Oh, there's an example of that. Oh, okay. So that's it.
Okay.
I'm
I
done.
think, I
Thank
think
you.
not to steal Josh's thunder, but when we get to his piece of tonight's meeting, I think we'll probably get better to answer your question, because one of the things we're going to be talking about is illustration of what we're talking about, potential build out illustratively and apply it to Norfolk Town Center. So we'll come back to that when we get to that, when we get to Josh. John Wilton had a question. John? There, John?
You know,
Gotcha.
following on Erin's line, if you 40 hour just to stop and shop land, don't forget, people want places to walk to shop and eat. All of the other lots, whether it be an empty lot or a rebuild in the center of town, are financially not viable because they don't have enough units. So if you don't include all of the other lots in the 40R, you're not going to have viability to ever get commercial, whether you put the stop and shop and limit it to just all residential, or if you put commercial on that as a requirement. Commercial on that requirement is least desirable because it's got a dead end street in the back. So I think you really have to look at the whole zone, because if you want to get the commercial in and make all the lots viable, even if somebody decides they want to tear down and build up. Rich, a question on the minimum density on the multifamily units. How much per acre is that? The single family is 8, the duplex is, or what's the multi?
20.
20. So basically, and we went over this on a 40R 9 years ago. So basically on 25 Rockwood Road, to answer Martha's question, on a 6.5 acre lot, if somebody did multi-unit, it's the 6.5 acre lot by the 20 units. I love the idea of putting in components to limit the requirements for into the 40 district, but I would guess that if the limits do not let them build to the minimum density, you're probably going to have a problem. But I think working and putting all this together, and especially with the chance to stop a 40B because the whole district is 40R, and make it so it works, I think coming up with a formula to make that happen, I think is a super idea. But I think that first of all, you're probably going to have to consider everything in the core there as a 40R if you want to make this workable. Because when you come to town meeting and you're talking about 1 5-acre stop and shop lot with all residential or maybe some commercial, you're probably going to have a hard time because the other lots there are all not viable financially to put a commercial spot on. Thank you.
Kevin, you had your hand.
So just to kind of piggyback on what John and Erin were alluding to, we're perfectly open to hearing about proposals for expanding the overlay district. I thought that there was some distinct benefit to being able to isolate the 5-acre or largest lot there, to be able to have a different set of guidelines than the rest of the parcels. But I also understand John's point about wanting to be able to utilize the same resources to have those lots be developed in a way that really completes the look and the vision for town center. I will say that in my research about what worked and what didn't in terms of getting these types of things through a town meeting, the number one issue was getting 2/3 of the community to vote in favor of it. So to Erin's point before, the worst thing, or something that does not lend itself to developing commercial growth in town center, is to have a proposal fail at town meeting and have nothing get changed. So I want to make sure that, you know, we take into account the feedback we've heard for the last year and a couple of months and weigh that against what we feel the community has an appetite for and the benefits that it'll reap thereafter. Thanks.
So what we'll do is Martha or Chris has a question, and then what I'll do is just hold it for them, and then we'll get to Josh's. That way we can be mindful of everybody's time. Go ahead, Martha.
Just so very quickly, so John said you'd have to make everybody else happy or viable, you'd have to make the entire thing a 40R. But then is there like a cap where you can say, oh, hey, we've had enough 40Rs? Or could, I mean, 25 Rockwood by right is 120 units. So could you say, oh, we already have one of those, we don't need any more? And then what does that mean for the other property owners? So I'm just trying to understand does it have those kinds of protections? Like if you get enough 40Rs, you can just hunker down.
Yeah, so let me take that one, Rich. So take, for instance, we don't have to take the whole district and make it 40R, right? We could pick a number of sites. We could pick sites that don't include 6-acre sites, right? So your sites are limited to the size that they are. Now, granted, you could combine sites within that, but again, if you take 3 sites to make one big site, then you've got one development instead of 3 developments. So, I think it would be helpful to look at a map to see what kind of an area that we're talking about creating as a larger 40R district first. I think that would go a long way to help explain this part. I think the second thing is I guess to more directly answer your question is we wouldn't be, the way we would regulate the size of the developments is through the design guidelines and through the size of the sites that we put in the 40R district. Right. But that's the short answer.
If we jump to segue to Josh's presentation, he does have some illustrations which we'll be going through, which will probably help a little bit visually. Just in the back of your mind, think about 40R, and then I don't mind if everybody's okay, we'll turn it over to Josh to go to his portion of the agenda.
I think that's a good idea, Rich. We need to keep moving.
All right, Josh, you want me? I'll share I'll screen share with you, and you can go through your.
Yeah, that'd be great if you could make me co-host or whatever you need to.
Yep.
While Rich is doing that, I'll just chime in too that I think the discussion of the 40R district is a great one for the committee. And I think as has been touched on by a lot of people, and I think Kevin outlined very well towards the beginning, the 40R district responds to a lot of the criticisms which we've heard to our zoning efforts to date. And I think gives a viable pathway forward to some meaningful changes in town center. So I think it's this conversation, the exploration of the 40R district is a really good one.
Andrew, could you make Josh Fiala a co-host? I don't seem to have control to do that.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
So I have just a brief discussion item, and I hate to disappoint Aaron. I think you mentioned that I will have answers, but I actually have more questions than answers tonight. And what I wanted to do was just discuss very explicitly with the committee the assignments. We've heard requests for work to be completed, and I think that we're well positioned to provide some of those answers. But what I wanted to do is just talk through what you want us to do and be very clear and deliberate about that, so that we don't spin our wheels spending a lot of time in budget doing something that then you wanted to be a little different. So I'll just talk you through what I mean by that with this brief discussion. So here are the things that we've been hearing and that we're poised to bring back to you at your next meeting based upon what we discussed right now. Revisiting the build out analysis, getting a better feel for what is that maximum build out that we're talking about? What would it look like, to some of the questions we've heard this evening? What would a build out look like with a different type of parcel assembly? So not the parcels that exist today, but under some different circumstances that could occur in the future, and exploring those implications. And then looking at the financial feasibility through a bit of a spreadsheet analysis that I've got set up. I just need to clarify the assumptions with you all. And then lastly, thinking about some way to illustrate everything we've been talking about. We've been talking about a lot of details, a lot of technical items that relate to zoning and sometimes jargon and other phrases that people might not clearly be following. And sometimes a picture is really worth 1,000 words. And if we could set up a diagram of illustration of what we're hoping the end result of all this technical discussion would be, that might help people immensely. So the first item, we did, as we've mentioned a few times in our previous study, getting the previous B-1 recommendations assembled, did a build-out analysis based upon this parcel analysis that's on the screen in terms of which parcels would be more likely to change or less likely to change in the future. The green parcels are the most likely to change in the near term. And we can do an update of that build-out analysis. The thing that I would actually really want to ask, though, from the committee is what characteristics at this point would you like us to study in terms of that revised build-out analysis? So for the last few meetings, we've talked through the various zoning recommendations, and I think we were starting to form and take shape in terms of those recommendations. Of course, the discussion we've just had this evening about the 40R would be a little bit different considerations in terms of a build-out analysis. So I'll just open up the floor. What sort of set should we do the Stop and Shop lots as a 40R with the 20 unit per acre density, and then some of the other parcels maybe based upon the previous B1 zoning recommendations as have been discussed most recently in the committee, kind of how those are shaping up. And should we be looking at near-term parcels, long-term parcels, et cetera? So I know that there's a lot there to discuss and get through, but maybe if you could offer some guidance on that.
So Josh, here are my thoughts, my quick thoughts. One is we could have another 3 meetings to talk about the question you just asked. So I think we need to work on being simple and straightforward with it. I think what we're trying to do with this analysis is to set maximum bookends. So I don't think anybody is pushing to increase the densities and area requirements that we had in our initial proposals, right, a year ago or a year and a half ago now, right? Which are somewhat in alignment with what the MAPC report is recommending. So my 2 cents is that you should be using those numbers for your study, because that's going to set a maximum number, right? So we're talking about a maximum number of units. We're talking about a maximum volume of build out area. We're talking about a maximum number of heads. And that's what I think this exercise is set to intend. It is intended to set, right? It's to put bookends on what if through whatever shape or means maximum development was to happen in downtown Norfolk. This is the highest volume, largest development, biggest number of people that would ever be accommodated.
Okay, that's very helpful. And with those bookends, would you want us to include the most recent consideration of a 40R district, at least on that one parcel, which would I think expand that maximum bookend potentially?
Yeah, I know that's an interesting one. I don't know how to, I don't think so, because I think we're muddying the waters. I think we need to consider 40R outside of it, because the exercise we're asking you to take on is applying the zoning guidelines to the entire, potential zoning changes to the entire district. I think with a 40R, one of the reasons we would promote a 40R is that we would promote it in a smaller area. So although it might increase the density on a smaller area, 1 site, 2 sites, 3 sites, whatever, I think overall it would be a less of an impact than the applying where we currently stand with our recommendations, or where we stood a year ago, to the entire district. So I think if you stick with where we were a year and a half ago, you're going to end up with higher numbers than if we start introducing 40R, unless we were to introduce 40R to the entire district. But I don't think I haven't heard anybody promote that yet. So,
but maybe a value to the committee would be at least a comparison of 40R then kind of as a separate, not integrated with the previous recommendations, but as a separate option that compares maybe the Stop and Shop and then maybe a larger 40R district to that set of previous B1 recommendations.
A appendix to the study or something. Yeah, a revision to the study or whatever where the right term is. But yeah, an option. Yep.
And just to, I think, Aaron, I would say that it wouldn't be exactly the recommendations that were in our report. For example, I think the committee's discussion around the parking requirements was landing on pushing those back to 1.5 per unit rather than being the more aggressive 1 per unit. So I think that would also curtail that overall maximum bookend that you're describing. So
But again, rather than open up each of the individual items for discussion, which is essentially what we'd be doing, I would say just take what we pushed we were pushing for the town meeting a year and a half ago and use those guidelines as your study. And that will set the maximum bookends and we can go down from there. Right.
Okay. And then just to also clarify, so it had always been our assumption, I just want to clarify this, the parcels that you see on this illustration on the screen in red are parcels that we are assuming even under changing zoning circumstances will not actually be changing on the ground because they have been recently developed recently enough that they would not change regardless of the zoning context, and or our municipal facilities, which also would not change, or MBTA owned.
I would agree. Of course, it doesn't look red to me, but anyway, yeah.
Yes, the salmon color, orangish, brownish red.
I think I'd question the two properties to the furthest page right, the one across the tracks and the one. Yeah, I think you need to consider those.
Okay.
Those are town owned, aren't they?
They are.
Yeah. So I wouldn't include them either.
Again, we're talking about a max build out.
The thing is, just to clarify, Aaron, that the one is the school on the other side of the track.
Yeah, it's the ball fields. Yeah.
You wouldn't want to include that, would you?
No.
I just have an opinion.
Okay. Right. How about other committee members? I guess just
I mean, I think we have to, I think we talked about creating a core at one time, a realistic core area within the B1 district, where realistic retail, commercial development might happen and where we would want it to happen. And I don't think it's those outliers.
But again, this isn't about setting a core or having that. This is about
just a build up.
This is about finding out what the worst case scenario is for the proposals that we had a year ago, right? This is setting a bookend maximum development for that conversation.
But
Excuse me, who?
If those outlying properties are owned by the town, why there's not a plan to sell those? So why would we include them as viable?
Because the town might sell them.
If you're speaking about specifically the fields, or you're speaking about lots of other properties?
No, where the old town hall is, those properties.
Oh, I think the old town hall should absolutely be considered, because at some point either the town's going to develop it or turn it into something, or they're going to sell it. But I don't think necessarily that the ball fields behind Freeman should be considered, because they're never going to get rid of those. Ball fields are a necessity.
Yeah.
But I do think that Old Town Hall should be considered. I don't know that the town will sell it, but I think the town might actually put municipal buildings on it at some point.
That came up to vote 2 town meetings ago, and it was struck down. And I think one of the core considerations for that was that it's if it were to be built upon because it abuts wetlands or something, it would need to be the exact foundation that's currently there. It's kind of an impossible project and very hard to sell.
There's water on.
It came up to be sold, or it came up for the town to put something there.
It came up to vote to sell it to a developer, and the town said no because it's one of the last pieces of property the town owns. It's not developed, but the town is kind of in a trouble spot. I don't want to speak matter of factly because this is just from memory, but there's severe limitations on what can happen on that lot. Rich, is any of this ringing a bell?
Yeah, not to go too far afield here. I think it probably would be okay to still consider it because I think some of the, well, one, for that town meeting, I think there really wasn't necessarily a proposal associated with it. That was one of the things I recall. The town meeting was seemed a little bit too open-ended, but from doing a little bit more homework, it may not be, there are limitations, but it may not be as dramatic as people were necessarily thinking, but it would require a lot more analysis. So for this planning exercise, I probably would at least consider it.
This pertains to that lot, but it's slightly off topic. I apologize. I can't see who it was. I think it was Josh, maybe, who, I actually don't know who said it, but when you say it's too close to wetlands, could it be done as a green space? Like, could the building itself be demolished and then the town put in a green space there? And I only asked that because we had talked about designating a green space fund at one point, you know, a way to interconnect some of these places together. Do you know if that is possible?
So that's definitely a possibility. I mean, the stream goes underneath, it's essentially the stream bisects a portion of the property and goes through a culvert. So, but yeah, there are potential options for that property. It might not bear fruit as far as like selling it for kind of the core things that we're talking about with the B-1, maybe mixed use or residential necessarily, but there may be a municipal related use or, something.
Again, I just want to reiterate that what we're trying to do is to find a maximum worst case scenario. So if we're hemming and hawing on a site, just include it, right?
Yeah. Can always take it out afterwards if you.
Okay. So no, I think that's good direction from the committee. Aaron, I think your summary just now of sort of defining this, revisiting the build out analysis in terms of trying to discover a worst case scenario in regard to, I mean, some would call it a worst case scenario, others might not, but a maximum scenario in terms of most housing units and most commercial space that's possible under some future zoning, a set of future zoning recommendations. Okay, so that's, I think.
Josh, hold on before you change real quick. I just want to make two things. What are we doing with the 240B lots? Are you going to do those as they're proposed to be developed, or are you going to do them as the zoning guidelines would allow?
Yeah, I was considering those already approved and underway in a development process, so they would not be included in this build out analysis, but would be assumed to be developed under their approved building programs.
I think that's true for Rockwood. Can we say the same for 194?
I think that's up to you guys.
Well, 194 is fully approved.
It is. Okay.
Completely done, yeah. So
Okay.
I think they have one or two like waiver discussions, but I think it's pretty been signed off.
All right. So yep. So then they're not included. So
No,
they would
they're
be,
not. So
they would be salmon if you were to edit this map. Right.
Yes.
So just the other thing I want to say is I want to give everybody on the committee an opportunity to object to what we've defined as the salmon areas, right? So if anybody on the committee is not in general agreement with what we just discussed, then speak now, because we don't want to send Josh down a road and then have to change it later. So, Ed, you good?
I'm okay with the salmon areas, yeah.
Gary, you good?
Yep, salmon's good.
Eileen, you good?
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. I think we should maximize everything and see what happens.
All right, I think, oh, Kevin, I forgot about Kevin hiding there. Kevin's good. All right. I think that covers the committee, at least. Oh, Susan, we got Susan too.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, so you're good there, Josh.
So wait, can I just clarify? So Josh is not going to tell us what could go on the yellow properties?
The yellow's
Yes.
included, Josh, right? Yeah.
Yes, so we would be studying the yellow and the green. We would not be looking at salmon and turquoise.
Right.
Because they're already approved and built, and people are happy with what's there, kind of thing. They're not older developments.
Right.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
they've been either recently constructed or are municipal property.
With one edit, with the two salmon properties south of the train line, farthest plan east, right, are going to
Yes.
they're going to be made yellow. Right?
So
that one can stay salmon.
Yes, so it'd be what's shown here as 225634.
Yeah.
Can you eliminate the turquoise so we don't have so many colors?
Yeah, we'll just make that into the salmon color.
Thank you.
And I will I'll even try to get a hold of the approved 194 Main Street plan, because our little massing model there does not reflect that.
I could send you that plan.
All right. Sorry, Josh, go ahead.
Nope. So thank you very much. That's this is excellent to confirm this just before we do a lot of work on it. Then the next part was a similar discussion to confirm what we see as the potential for parcel assembly in the district, which has been discussed a few times. But this would be doing a similar exercise of a build out within the district under the zoning recommendations, but instead of considering the current confines of the parcels as they are delineated, it would look at the assembly and combination of parcels which are adjacent to each other. I've identified 8 possibilities across the district, which I think are the logical places that parcel assemblies could occur under a development scenario. So, and those are on the green and yellow areas again from that same parcel analysis. And just, I guess I would just confirm, does the committee agree that this would be sort of the lumping together of those 8, or do you want to include others or not include some of these 8?
Well, again, I'll start because go ahead, whoever was going to start.
I was just going to say, this is Ed. I was just going to question 6 because with the isn't that the gas station property?
Yeah, that would be right on the corner. Basically, the properties which are on the east frontage of Rockwood Road, right by the rail line, which does include the gas station.
Yeah, and again, I think in a theoretical study, Ed, it's worth reviewing, because that would be a pretty popular spot, I would think.
I'm just thinking of the mitigation with the gas tanks and the soil contamination and everything else there.
They'd probably just build around it.
Yeah.
So the one thing that does jump out, especially given the conversation we just had, in order to make the currently salmon property all the way to the plan right south of the train line feasible, it would need to be part of 8. So you might want to expand 8 to include that property.
Yep, that makes sense.
How about in between 6 and 7 that I'm looking at? We have the yellow that runs along Main. I don't know.
That's one site though, right?
The reason I didn't I mean, I looked at that very closely too. I think it's reasonable to maybe make those all the yellow by 6 a single assembly. I did not, because there's a small access road between what I've labeled as 6 and the adjacent to the right yellow parcel. That
Okay.
it's imaginable that in a larger development in that parcel assembly, the access road could be reconfigured, or if there's an easement there, it could be, there could be a trade that occurs, something along those lines.
And again,
so
I'll reiterate that this is a theoretical exercise too, so it's not worth overthinking it.
Yeah, yep.
Right, but I mean, I think this is a pretty good representation of a number of smaller sites that could possibly be combined to be larger sites to promote larger development, and that's kind of what the goal of this exercise is. So, right, like take one for instance, right? That's the perfect example. It's a collection of 5 or 6 small residentially developed sites that could potentially be combined to promote a large mixed-use commercial development. Right, and that's exactly what the public is asking us to look at.
Right.
Well, isn't the post office in number 1 also? Is that federal property?
No, no, they have a lease.
Oh, okay.
So again, I'll go through for discussion and acceptance. Just I guess I'll call out the committee members that we're in a general agreement with what's on screen, with the one amendment of expanding 8 to include the site to its page right. Ed, how do you feel?
Okay, all
Good.
set.
Gary?
Good.
Susan?
Good.
Good. Eileen?
Yes.
Kevin?
Glorious.
So we're not worried about expanding 6 at all. You guys are fine with that?
I think that's fine.
Okay. Thank you very much. That is very helpful. So in effect, I think it'll be a very useful exercise for the committee. You'll have a comparison of a set of calculations and diagram that show this parcel assembly compared to development under the parcels as they exist today. So that those two will be, we could look at side by side.
So Josh, I'm going to take advantage of that map while it's on screen for the committee. So if the committee were to ask me what I would choose for 40R zone, it would be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And I would include the site between 6 and 7. And I would call that our 40R district for future conversation.
Can you repeat those numbers? You said 3, 4.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the site between 6 and 7. The site that's not the MBTA, the southern site, the Dunkin' Donuts site. I would call that our higher density 40R inner core, whatever the right word is. So, thanks for humoring me again, Josh.
All right, I will keep moving along. And then, so next, the exercise of looking at financial feasibility of the mixed use development programs. Again, I think we've confirmed it'll basically be the same zoning assumptions that plug into that financial model. And then the other question, I guess you can confirm that. And then the other question is asking if anyone on the committee or on the call from the public has specific data sources, like, for example, they really want us to use the rents that are recently coming in from 18 Union Street, for example, like whatever would make this most believable in terms of because we're basically just using assumptions to plug into this financial model. And so if you want those assumptions to be something that you believe, then let us know and we'll plug those in. So that will make it helpful and more believable from your side of things. So these models are usually as good as the assumptions you plug into, is the basic conclusion.
I would defer to your expertise on that one, Josh, but I know it might be worth, Rich, you might want to ask around or do some of our own research to see if there's some data analysis or something that the town commonly relies on that we could share with Josh. But
well, I know we could get at least the rental numbers, from the
Yeah.
residential side of things, that, but I don't know if I can get, I'd like to get commercial. I don't know if I could. I'd try.
I just don't know if I'd want it. Like, I wouldn't want to take 18 unit and apply it across the entire district like it was gospel. You know, that seems like
Yeah.
too small of a sample. But
Yeah.
if you could somehow modify your statewide data with 18 union recent data, yeah, I defer to you and the experts on that one, Josh.
Yep. Yeah, we usually try to zero in on what's probably best termed market comparable data around Norfolk, the best sort of most current information we can find in terms of residential rents, residential unit sales, and then retail and commercial rents as well, and then plug those into the model, as well as construction costs. The construction costs aren't very localized. I mean, the construction costs are the construction costs anywhere in the region. So, but it's the rent and revenue profiles are very localized to the municipality.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll just do that. We'll let you know where the assumptions come from, of course, when we report out the results from the analysis, and we can talk through that next meeting. And then lastly, so that what we've been talking about so far, those 3 exercises are relatively still technical exercises. They will give us a lot of good feedback and information that we can compare to and get a more on the ground feeling for what the resulting action is from the zoning recommendations. But then I thought that a more illustrative version of the diagrams that will go into the build out analysis would be helpful for people to just get a feel for what does this start to look like on the ground, with a little more detail put into it. And I just wanted to first ask, does the committee think that a drawing such as the one that's on the screen would be useful, which we've used in other places to try to depict the results of all of this more technical discussion? And if
1,000 times, yes.
Okay, so I can do, you know, it's kind of like taking the information, the analysis which we would put into the build out anyways, but then just taking it a few steps further in terms of making it into more of an illustration that you see.
And of course, you'd be using our design guidelines as your driver.
Yeah, we'd be using all of the both technical aspects of the zoning and the design guidelines, and then do in such a way that we can call out with labels or just verbally what those different aspects we are including. So for example, like the pitched roof, or the step backs at a height, or the variations in the facade every 40 feet, whatever the guideline is, or whatever the zoning aspect is, or the setbacks, the conditions of the frontage between the street and the building, all of that we would talk through and try to illustrate as accurately as possible. Of course, it's still a concept illustration and diagram, so it wouldn't be, you know, we won't be able to do everything perfectly detailed, just in the interest of time and budget, but it would be a close to an illustration of what we would be thinking is appropriate, and the resulting development from the package of zoning and guidelines that we've been talking about.
I think it'd be very much appreciated, Josh.
All right, so I'll hedge my bet a little bit. I'll promise the first 3. I think those are all accomplishable for the next meeting, and hopefully, I think this last one I will be able to complete as well. But I might have to ask for the committee's forgiveness a little bit and push that one out to the next session. But I will try to get all 4 of these sort of work assignments completed, if not well underway, for the next session.
Sounds great.
Have we discussed yet when our next meeting is?
We're gonna actually go there next.
I'm going to just unfortunately have to be a little last minute for August. My son's college keeps changing the date, and now they're talking about bringing him in 2 weeks early to quarantine there. So I still don't know when we're driving him to Vermont, and that's going to be a couple of days process. So unfortunately, whatever date we pick in August, unless it's at the very end of August, is probably, I'm going to have to be flexible. I may or may not be able to attend. Sorry.
So our calendar has the 17th out there. So,
And right now they're asking for the 17th.
yeah.
So they're going to make the decision on August 2nd, hopefully. And it was originally supposed to be August 27th. And then now they want them to come 10 days early to quarantine on campus, possibly, depending on what state you're coming from. Unfortunately, I just don't know. And I'm sure other people are dealing with this as well, but I just have no way of knowing when he's actually leaving for college.
So just, Aaron, excuse me, as far as the schedule goes, so the next meeting, is at least put into the calendar as August 17th. And the agenda for that meeting tentatively was presentation of warrant items to the planning board.
Yeah, I don't think we have warrant items to present. So,
Right. So so the goal would be to cover these items that we're talking tonight for the next meeting.
I think so. I think we need to understand these items. I think everybody needs to think on 40R a little bit more, and then we need to start. I think our next meeting is probably going to be our last sort of big think meeting, and then we need to start making some recommendations.
Mhm.
So I think we have one more big think meeting in August, and then at September 7th, we come in with an outline for hammering out 40R and article recommendations and/or article recommendations. And hopefully by the time we finish the meeting on the 7th, we have a cohesive recommendation.
Okay.
You say September 7th, because that's actually Labor Day.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's not a good time to have a meeting, but that is what we have on our calendar. Maybe we push it to the 14th.
Okay. All right.
Sorry to interrupt. Could I take the microphone back for a moment?
Sure.
I forgot to click to this last slide, and it does actually have some good questions, which I had prepared, but then ignored. The first just on the illustration. So yes, the committee does want the illustration, but does the committee have any strong desires about what kind of view to illustrate? It would be good to set the view up, which would be best for you all. And then the other big question is, in that illustration, should the parcels be combined or not combined?
So I would say I'd stick to what we have, Josh. I think you need to start with the view of the town that we have now that you have that's kind of 3D oriented, the map of the entire B1 district. And then maybe you could do blow-ups. Like you could do a blow-up window to what this little area looks like and a blow-up window to what that little area looks like.
Okay.
And then I think you do a combination, right? So maybe take whatever 4 of the 8 combined lots that you guys so choose and that aren't 8, because eight's an outlier. So I would take 4 of 1 through 7 and do those as combined lots. Don't use 1 and don't use 8. So now you're down to 6. So 4 of the other 6.
Well, 2 is a standalone also, isn't it?
Yeah, 6 was.
2 is a standalone also.
It's actually combined with the music, Ivy Music.
Yeah, that little, the little corner.
Yeah, so maybe you do 3, 4, 5, and 6 combined.
Okay. All right, thank you. Sorry to interrupt. That was helpful.
It's our inner core.
Okay. So with just to help Josh a little bit, with the committee be comfortable with essentially 1 through 3 assignments for the 17th, if the illustration's not there, that at least ideally we like to have it, but if not, we still.
I'm not going to make him do it. I would think it would be fantastic if you had all 4, but I think the 3 would be great.
Okay. All right.
I'll give it a shot. I'll at least try to have something in progress so that the committee can react to it and let us know if we're way off track in terms of where the illustration's headed.
That'd be great.
Good. All right. No, I guess I just have one thing, and it's not. If there isn't anything else. So what we're incurring is working on, from the map that we worked before, as far as the sewer district, doing some build out as far as sewer loads based on the map. Hopefully we'll have maybe something in August that we'll revisit. So we'll see on the timing there, but I know they're working on that presently. And then Kevin, the warrant is September. You haven't set a timeline, right? Or at least for when it opens and so forth in the fall.
No, we did. I just don't have it in front of me at the moment.
Oh, okay.
I'm still exhaling from annual town meeting, Rich. For the love of God, we have a couple weeks, man.
Okay.
Just before we end, I just wanted to say thank you to Josh for that great presentation and his action items. I really feel like they spoke to what Chris and I have been participating this whole time to hear. So we're really thankful to you, and we look forward to seeing what you put together.
I agree. Thank you. Thanks, Josh. So
should we plan on the next meeting is the 17th, at least as of right now?
yes.
Okay, just for planning purposes.
Yep. And then maybe Susan's on the
I
call.
will let you know as soon as I know
Sure.
about my availability on the 17th, just so that it's not a last minute thing. As soon as I hear from the school, I will let you know.
Yeah, no problem. Understood.
And I will watch it on YouTube if I do have to miss the meeting, so that I might not be part of the conversation, but at least I'll have all the information.
Okay. Awesome.
Rich, I just had a thought too, with Gary being relatively new here. We send him like a welcome to the committee package, like with the warrant items from last year, perhaps the documents that we were trying to get posted to the website, right? The numbers, the executive summary, all that stuff.
Sure. But I do, for what it's worth, I have posted a bunch of things on the committee page since the last meeting. But yeah, I could send him some other stuff as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Rich, just to follow up on your question, I think that we're targeting opening the warrant at the end of August. I think that the feedback we got last year was that doing it in September feeling slightly rushed. So I think we're going to try to open the warrant in August.
Okay. Thank you. All right. That's it for myself. I don't know.
Anybody on the committee? Let's run around. Kevin, you good?
Oh yeah, I'm good. Thanks.
Gary?
All good, thank you.
Welcome officially. Ed?
I'm good, thank you.
Eileen?
Looks good.
Susan?
Yes.
All good. All right. Martha and Chris, any closing comments?
Nope, just thanks very much.
All right. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Right.